All right, so let's turn to the argument that justifies the fairness doctrine. It says it is, in fact, a fair doctrine. It's an appropriate use of government power to regulate telecommunications in the public interest. Now, we identify the parties who are involved here and their relationships. One is to focus on the status of the broadcaster. It's the person who, say, owns the radio station, owns the transmitting equipment, owns the business right behind it, and owns the license to broadcast at a certain frequency. So here we have broadcasters, and we'll put the larger heading up here. This is the pro-fairness doctrine position. And the broadcasters are, of course, broadcasting to an audience, and so we'll call that just the audience. And these are, in one respect, the sellers. These are the consumers. A little bit different in that the audience doesn't pay directly the broadcasters for the service. Instead, the broadcasters sell advertising to advertisers, and those are the ones who pay for the costs, right, of delivering the product. And so these guys get the product, so to speak, for free, except their listening time with respect to the commercials is the price that they pay. Now, in the first case, what do we think the relationship is between these two parties? And the fear that advocates of the fairness doctrine have is that the broadcasters have access to a very powerful medium of communication, right? And so that puts them in a position of strength, particularly in the early days of telecommunications. There may be very few broadcasting licenses available in a given area. It would not be uncommon for a town or a village or even a small city only to have one radio station. And so their strength, so to speak, comes from their having a monopoly, right, or control, right, over the supply. So I'll put that just with a slight question mark at it. Whether it's one or two or three is not really the issue here. The point is that there's a very limited, in some cases scarce, supply of this powerful resource, and so they exert a significant amount of power. By contrast, the audience is thought to be in a position of weakness. They only have one radio station available to them, right? And so they can't go and listen to other radio stations in order to get other viewpoints and so forth. Also, the argument here would be that these guys are the active party. They're the ones who are controlling the resource. They're the ones who decide what the programming is going to be. And in this case here, the audience, all it can do is more passively listen. It has no control over the content of the marketing. And so the fear then is that we have an active monopoly or close to it with access to a powerful medium of communication, that it's in a position then to shape public opinion. And so the contrast point over here is that these guys are in a position to have their opinions shaped. Or we might even put it more strongly to say that their viewpoints on various things can be manipulated. Okay. All right, so what's going to happen then from this perspective is if we have an audience, right, that we think of having relatively weakness along these dimensions here, and broadcasters having strength, right, along these dimensions here, that what's going to happen is a free market. We let these guys say whatever they want to these people over here. We don't exert any sort of control. It's laissez-faire. What's going to happen is a win for the broadcasters. They'll be able to announce their views, get their message out there, and the audience is going to have its views shaped or at worst manipulated, and that does them a disservice as well. Now, if we put this in the context of political issues, which largely drove many of the complaints, the fear is that in a democracy, this situation is especially bad. What we want in a democracy is for the people who are voting to be actively involved in the process, to know what all of the issues are, to know what all of the major positions on those issues are, so that by the time they go into the voting booths, they are voting in a responsible and an informed way. And so the argument here is that if we have a free market in telecommunications, then in an election year, that is not what we are going to get. Instead, what we will get is a significant number of people in the audience whose views have been manipulated, right, or shaped in a certain way. They haven't heard both sides of the debate, and this then strikes a critical blow to the democratic process, right, per se. Instead of having a democracy, what we have is businesses being able to shape and control the political climate of a country, and then what happens in terms of who gets elected is going to be those who best represent the viewpoints of the broadcasters, right, so to speak. And so in strong language, we can say this is a kind of predation. Right, we have the stronger party taking advantage of the weaker party, and we end up with bad news. All right, there's another wrinkle, though, another party that is involved here, and that has people who are the competitors, as I'm going to call them. Also, right, in this case, political competitors, but many of the complaints, rather, did not come from audience members, but rather it came from political competitors, people who were running for office, who wanted to get their views out on the radio, but were denied access because the broadcasters would disapprove, right, of the person or the person's politics. And so what they would then say is that we have an unfair situation because the broadcasters are in a position of strength, they control access to the resource, and they are not allowing me access. And so that's putting me in a position of weakness. I'm not able to, on an equal playing field, get my views out in this democratic process. So the competitors, right, will say that we have actually two kinds of competitors. We have those who are in a position of strength. All right, if I personalize it, suppose I'm the broadcaster, right, and my friend Jim, right, is running for office, and I like his political views. He then is in a position of strength because I will give him access to my radio station. But equally so, there are competitors, right, who are in a position of weakness. Suppose you also are running for office against Jim, and I don't like you, and I don't like your political views. And so when you show up and say, I'd like to buy some radio time to respond to the points that Jim made, I say, no, you can't have it. And so relative to getting your message out by means of radio, you are in a position of competitive weakness. And so what we then have is another win-lose scenario that results. The stronger competitor, that is to say the competitor who is favored by the broadcasters, that person wins. The competitor who is in a position of weakness, that is to say someone who is not favored by the broadcasters, lose. And so we have a strong taking advantage of the weak in this particular area. All right, so what do we do about this? Well, if we think that the free market is going to lead to a bad result, particularly a bad result in politics, particularly a bad result in democratic politics, then the appropriate solution is going to involve some sort of political overpowering, right, of these negative results of the free market. And so that then means we will bring in the government, right? In this particular case, we will have the FCC, and what it will see its job as appropriately doing is to regulate, right, telecommunications, to ensure fairness. But then we have to ask what notion of fairness are we talking about? It will have to be this notion of fairness here, that the problem is this inequality, right, of assets and power between broadcasters and audience, the inequality of access and power among the competitors, and so we need to equalize, so to speak, that power imbalance. And so fairness, right, means a kind of equalization. It means also that the government is going to have to help the weaker parties in their competitive struggle against the stronger party. So if we think the weaker party here is not being served well, then what we need to do is take the stronger party down a peg or two so it doesn't take advantage of them. If we think the broadcasters are playing favorites over here, then we need to take away their ability to play favorites, and that then will equalize. And so the government also in this case is acting in a somewhat paternalistic fashion, right? And paternalism here being the concept of using one's power to help the weaker party as a father would help a weaker child, right, protect itself and assert its interests. So if we take these as general policies, about what government is supposed to do. We look at the free market and we say that the free market in radio is leading to all kinds of win-lose transactions. Well, that will then justify a particular piece of regulation that we will call the fairness doctrine. And we'll just label it in terms of short time form here. And what we then do is mandate, right, equal access or equal time, right, to the resource in question. All right, so we have equal access or equal time, time also being a resource in this particular case, and we kill two birds with one stone. On the one hand, if we have the two competitors, one party gets an hour's radio time, the other party has to get an hour's radio time. And so that takes away the relative strengths and weaknesses with respect to this particular medium of communication. It equalizes them, it stops the predation. It also means then that if we have both of these competitors with equal time, that the effect on the audience is that they will not be as easily shaped or manipulated, because then the hope is they will hear both sides of the debate from articulate, committed people on both sides of the debate. They will therefore be better informed. They will be in a better position to make up their own minds so that by the time they enter the ballot box, they are voting in an informed and responsible way. All right.